Hi, and welcome to Asteria's Convos, where we are community, building the future. I'm your host, Asteria Elzea, hosting from land currently known as Los Angeles that has been tended for thousands of years by the Tongva and Chumash peoples. I owe everything I am to lands in the traditional territories of the Sauk and Fox nations. I acknowledge these ancestral tenders as a truth practice and reminder of the violence in our shared history, which has privileged myself and my farmer ancestors. Other identities I lead with are white, gender nonconforming, bisexual, and polyamorous. I'm newly discovered neurodivergent. I have CPTSD, severe generalized anxiety, and am chronically ill with Ehlers-Danlos. I've trained in connection and community building with Desiree Attaway, Beautiful You Coaching Academy, and in Carmen Spaniola's attachment-based, trauma-informed facilitation method. I have a work history in special events and as a stagehand. Plus, I'm a certified data analyst and practicing witch. I hope to explore all these topics and more on Asteria's Convos. So here we go! Hi, welcome to Asteria's Convos, where we're community building the future. I'm going to go ahead and light my candle for our conversation today, and then I'm going to have our guest for today introduce herself. Who are you? What's your name and pronouns?
Hi, my name is Ari Kapling. I use its pronouns if you have fucked with your gender in any way, shape, or form. And if you're just cis, then please use exclusively she, her pronouns for me.
And Ari, tell us what identities do you lead with?
Oh, goodness. I lead with my identity as a transsexual woman. I lead with my identity as a mom. I lead with my identity as a transsexual mom. I lead with my identity as a Therian, and I lead with my identity as an artist, and I lead with my identity as, a community builder, I suppose.
Okay, there's a couple identities in there I want to ask you about.
Yeah.
Uh, you're using the word transsexual,
Yes.
which is generally considered, not acceptable anymore, but you're using it for yourself. So could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I think that this divide around transgender versus transsexuality stems, and this is not a unique belief to myself. There's a growing movement within the wider trans community around this, that the taboo around transsexual and the defaulting towards transgender specifically stems from this idea of the divorcing of saying that like sex and gender are different things, which has created a wedge and a door through which to continue persecution of trans people. I am a transsexual because I have changed my sex. That's not to speak to any specific surgeries. It means that just in a general sense, there is no meaningful way to differentiate myself as a person who is on exogenous hormones and who has undergone certain medical procedures. There's no definable way to delineate my identity as being different from those of others who identify as female.
Sure. Yeah. And then there was another one you said, Nefarium? Epherium?
Therian. So a Therian is just kind of a shorthand for somebody who also identifies with a animal or animalistic identity. So this is most common in the LGBT community with people who identify as dogs or puppies. This is very like furry adjacent as well. I specifically identify as a deer girl. I know that there's not going to be a video out there for this, but I have cute little deer spots. I'm just realizing that I don't have my deer ears and I'm feeling very naked, but that's okay. We'll do it. But yeah, I have found a really centralizing and stabilizing piece of my identity in kind of seeing myself through this lens similar to that of deer, and through expressing myself in ways that align with visual and common perceptions of deer.
Yeah.
which is basically to say I'm very flighty. I have a tendency to freeze up, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a lot more to it than that.
A lot of fawning going in there.
Yeah, funny how that works. Don't,
Funny how that works.
yeah,
Can I tell everybody about how long I've known you?
yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
So I've known Ari since I was 19, and I just such a long time. Ari was detransit had transitioned in high school and detransitioned at that time and has since retransitioned,
Yes.
which I'm so happy for Ari for, but it's a very unique journey.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And
Uh,
like Ari's been one of the bridesmaids in my wedding, and we've been best friends for a decade.
Gosh, I still routinely go back to those pictures from your wedding. They bring me so much joy. There was so much like gender euphoria for myself in that day, and to be recognized and to be able to be a part of that as myself. I had gotten married before I retransitioned, and so back when I was still married, my wedding pictures were actually like a source of anguish for me to look at because they they show, even though the day itself was extremely joyous and extremely happy, that wasn't myself in those pictures. And so I love going to those pictures from your wedding and looking at them and seeing just how happy and joyous I was then, even though it was very early in the days of my retransition.
Yeah. But you looked so beautiful, and the orange dress you wore was perfect. And
Oh, it was fantastic. I still have it.
for people who don't know, I had a rainbow wedding. And so each of my bridesmaids got a color that they had to wear. Not also bridesmaids is inaccurate. We called them wedding party people because some of them were non-binary and various things. But anyway, Ari, what's your work in the world?
Oh goodness. In a materialist capitalist sense, I'm a bartender. So reductively, I'm a drug dealer. um, I work in a dive bar here in Chicago that, depending upon who you ask and depending upon what day you're there, is just an old neighborhood dive or is one of the oldest lesbian bars in Chicago. And I work basically in conversation with people. Vast majority of my work is building connections with people, building relationships, helping foster those relationships, both like on an individual sense between like patron and myself as a service worker, but also in like a wider community sense and like hearing what people are looking for, what people are missing, pointing them towards things in the community that kind of filled that need or that hole. There's a lot of low rent therapy that goes into that as well. I'm not trained as a mental health professional, but I have been a person who engages with therapy work on the receiving end for a very long time, and I know enough to be able to like when I hear somebody who is speaking in certain ways to like lay very very groundwork things to be able to like help get them a little bit more stabilized and like look at things from perhaps a different lens. I've had many a time where somebody will come in and sit down at the bar and look across the bar at me and be like, "I'm here for my cheap therapy," and I'm like, "Oh, what traumas are we bringing today?" But very recently, that's really kind of bled into another part of the work that I do in the world, which is kind of community building, community organizing, and like organizing in general. I used to be a union organizer. I worked with the Industrial Workers of the World for a while, both on organizing campaigns in Chicago and doing administrative work with the IWW at a local level and at a national level. And so I'm very focused on like ways to kind of build organizational structure in ways that are helpful to people specifically and gratefully if that helps uplift either workers or minorities in ways that help them reclaim power in their workplace, help them reclaim power in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah. Can I ask why you don't work with the union anymore?
The very short answer is I had a child, and I knew that the amount of time that I wanted to put into the union and the amount of time that I needed to put into the union was incompatible with being a mother to a newborn and an infant. And so I took a step away from the IWW so that I could, focus on this wonderful, sweet baby girl that I had at home and her needs that I had to meet. I still love the idea of returning to workplace organizing work at some point in the future. But right now, my organizing work is more community oriented and specifically around trans community here in Chicago and on the north side of Chicago.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move into how are you building community?
Gosh, this is a wild thing for me because where where I am now with kind of community in Chicago is someplace that I had like dreamed of kind of being able to be a part of just like as a member, but like had felt inaccessible to me for a very long time.
What felt
Uh,
inaccessible to you?
being integrated into like a much larger network and community of trans women in Chicago.
Why?
It had been very hard for me to make initial connections. And I had felt for a very long time like being a mother was a big barrier. And I do still feel that pretty regularly, actually. But I have found ways to work around that and to make time for myself and my community while also intentionally making time and making space for my daughter and for spending time with her because it's at the end of the day, like when push comes to shove, like I'm going to prioritize my young child over like going to social events with other trans people. But it was hard for me to figure out how to compartmentalize that for a very long time. And so this all kind of came to a head in late summer of 2024. There was a regularly occurring event in Chicago, a T-girl picnic that happened once a month. I had tried going once before and I was like, oh, picnic in a park. I'm going to bring my daughter. That was a terrible idea for two reasons. One, there were no other children there, and that would have been very, very strange. Just like not fitting the correct vibe for the space.
Hmm.
But much more importantly, my at the time 1.5-year-old daughter was like, that's a lot of people and I don't know them. And I am highly anxious and do not want to be in this space. And
Right.
so, and that, kind of reinforced what I was just talking about, those feelings of like not being able to access this community and that there was this barrier between myself and this community that I wanted very badly to be a part of. And I tried again, going again the following month, this time wisely without my daughter, and met some lovely people, had some lovely conversations. I later that evening, or possibly the next day, I think it was that evening, I made an innocuous tweet about an exchange that I had there that blew up on Twitter. And a lot of other people who I hadn't gotten the chance to meet, who were trans feminine people in Chicago, trans women, trans girls, saw that and kind of connected with me over social media space. And by the time I went to the next social event, there were a bunch of people that I had connected with in a digital environment that I was then able to connect with in a physical environment. And from there, everything kind of just spiraled out to where I am now.
Where are you now?
Oh gosh. I get very self-conscious talking about this because it very feels very out of place given how quickly it's happened. But I think it would be fair to say as most people as the people in my immediate nexus would describe me as, and I've heard them describe me as a role model and a mentor figure and a community builder. I work with a couple of other people in terms of organizing and driving turnouts to a number of trans events. I'm very rarely an active direct organizer of the events, but I have kind of a presence and connection in numerous different social circles and enclaves in the trans community in Chicago. And so I kind of function as a bridge to bring people from different groups together for different events that are being planned by organizers who are in different circles. And so this is manifested with a lot of different social events, whether it's poetry readings, whether it's just social gatherings, whether it's pointing people towards resources when they're looking at moving to Chicago, whether it's pointing people towards resources, gender affirming care, medical care, housing assistance, food scarcity assistance while they're in Chicago. And so having that network of resources from a lot of different places and being able to point people towards what it is that they're looking for, and also to bring people together to kind of bridge gaps across different pockets of community has been something that has been wonderful and fantastic and has brought me immense joy. And I'm very humbled to be able to do.
Yeah. That role as a bridge is one of the most important roles, I think, that
Yeah.
doesn't get a lot of acknowledgement, that, like, you're here the connection between different various groups, that's also a role that I serve a lot, is like, "Here, you meet you, you're gonna be okay."
Yeah.
And yeah.
And it's something I haven't really reflected on a lot, but like that's at least in my modern life, my modern social environs. But like this is something that like has been an aspect of my life for a very, very long time, even going back to, my youth when I was in high school, back at the late Cretaceous era. I I I was friends with people in all of the different cliques and would kind of bridge connections between all of these different circles as opposed to like fully truly integrating myself into one space and like one circle. And that's not to say that I didn't form like really deep and meaningful connections within, what were my primary circles, but I was always keeping eyes out towards others and looking for ways to bring those groups together, whether in passing or in terms of like meaningful connection building.
Yeah. How is your identity as a trans mom going? How's it working for you?
It's interesting. It's something that is simultaneously never far from my mind and also something that I don't think about. It's like I I don't know if this metaphor is going to quite work, but if you live in a building in an apartment or a home that is next to something tall, and that tall object casts a shadow over your windows, you don't really think about the fact that the windows are in shadow all the time, but it affects your life in meaningful ways. And there are those moments where you look at it and you see the the lack of unfiltered sun coming in. And that's not to say that being a trans mom is like blocking out part of the sun for me. That is very much not my experience.
But it
So
does
that
affect everything.
it does. It absolutely does. It affects things in my family life where my anxieties around the legalities of transness crossover with life and crossover with things that would affect my child. I've had conversations with my parents, with my co-parents about, for example, a desire to someday take my daughter to a place like Disney World. Is Disney World the one that's in Florida?
Yeah.
To take her to Disney World in Florida, and that the current state of the culture and the legality of transness in Florida being such that I couldn't go. And, they're probably it probably would be fine. Disney is not overtly, making policies that target trans people, but Florida is a very unsafe place legally for trans people. And while I feel very confident, I feel at this point I describe myself as being transitioned, as in my transition is finished. I I present and read as a woman, but I also present and read as a transsexual woman. Like I don't have this aspect that we call stealth, where I would appear like cisgender to like the passing eye. And so I would, it may be possible for me to do something like take her to Disney World, but my anxieties and my fears would be so strong and so prevalent and so intense that it would bleed over and affect her experience in ways that are distinctly unenjoyable and distinctly affecting her life. And that's not to say just Disney World. There's, my co-parent has family in Idaho, and Idaho is not a safe place for me to visit. My, I have family down in Florida who I would not be comfortable visiting. There are lots of places that, depending upon what journeys life takes her on, would be very difficult for me to participate in. But in a more day-to-day sense, I'm very fortunate that it doesn't feel like this big barrier or obstacle. My daughter is in daycare, and at daycare, you know, myself and my co-parent were both just, her moms, and they don't bat an eyelash. Like, nobody on the staff there bats an eyelash over the fact that I'm trans. A big fear that I had going into motherhood was that I was going to be, the other mom, in a way that, like, my transness was going to separate me from my motherhood in the way that other people saw me. And in practice, it really hasn't. And that's been great. And so in a lot of aspects of my day-to-day life, the fact that I am trans mom is not really as relevant as it is in, specifically that I am trans, or specifically that I am a mom.
Have you found how have you found community with other mothers, like mommy and me groups or like that kind of thing?
I found some community with that. There are some other trans women who are moms on the north side of Chicago. I've connected with a couple of them. We have a Discord server that a darling friend of mine, Evelyn, runs, where we kind of talk about things and share stories and experiences, tips, and it's really kind of, mundane day-to-day things. Like, we took our kids to X ice cream stand and they really loved it. And this ice cream stand, the people who take your ice cream order are puppets, and it's really cute. And then the puppet will, reach over and like bite to take the credit card out of your hands to go do the payment. And it's adorable. And like, you're like, oh my gosh, like, I can't wait to take my daughter there when she's a little bit older, and will like really, really appreciate it and engage with it. So like, I found that. I have, in like a wider sense, I've connected really well with some other mom spaces in adjacency. So for a long time, I was a stay-at-home mom with my daughter. I would take her out to parks. I would take her out on walks, and I would get to socialize with other moms and talk to other moms who are also at parks with their kids, and so on and so forth. But like, I haven't like integrated myself in with a, like, kind of classical like mommy and me groups that are like majority cis women. And that's mostly just because I've had most of those needs met through that initial community that I was describing with other trans moms.
Hmm. Hmm. That makes sense. I just remember when you were mostly stay at home that you were pretty lonely at first.
Yeah, that I think a lot of that stemmed from the weight of being just a stay-at-home. And, in those early days, I was much earlier into my retransition, and I had a lot more social anxieties about feeling like I didn't pass and that I would feel like I would stick out a lot more in in spaces for women. And I don't really have those anxieties anymore. I had a moment kind of in early fall of this year where just something kind of clicked and broke in my brain, where I was just like, I really don't care anymore whether or not I am feminine enough, whether I pass enough, whether I am, you know, you know, whatever lens you want to use. I'm just like, this is who I am, and I'm just going to be in these spaces, and I'm going to come into the spaces that I belong in. And if other people are uncomfortable with me using these spaces that I do belong in, then that is on them
Hmm.
and not on me. But I recognize that there's like a little bit of irony given the earlier conversations about, fears around travel, but those are like legalistic,
Yeah.
concerns.
Those are like very serious concerns as well. There's a
Yeah.
difference between caring whether like these people around me are going to judge me versus like, am I going to be legally in danger?
Yeah, I think one of the uh, interesting things for me about oh, just a moment, my screen just got all weird. There we go. I'm back. One of the interesting things for me about this legal thing that I'm navigating is that like I can have all the confidence in the world to, take my daughter to a pool and
Hmm.
to go into the women's dressing room and get changed into, a swimsuit and change my daughter into a swimsuit and get our towels and go out into the pool area and take her swimming because there's no, legally that is a protected act for me in Illinois. But if I were to do that very same thing in another state where that isn't protected, like I can have my daughter taken from me.
Right.
I can go to jail, but like the the threat of separation is intense.
Hmm.
And it's, you know, I like to live life a little bit with an attitude of like be gay, do crimes. But the it's harder to engage in that attitude of be gay, do crimes when a consequence for that very easily and very quickly could be I lose my daughter, you
Yeah.
know, that
Yeah.
that she is taken from me by the state using the state's violence and the state's force. So that's, a very distinct barrier.
And a serious consideration that I don't know. Like, I'm glad you're talking about it because I don't know if the audience is going to have thought about it that way, you know?
Yeah. It's it's very there's again it comes in degrees and stuff, but there's inherent risk of it, as a minority. There's an inherent risk of the receipt of state violence everywhere and with everything that you do. And but the where those risks are stronger and what may trigger that is something that you become acutely aware of, or that you are always acutely aware of for people who have always been visibly minority. And so it's a thing that people, you know, you don't you hear about the threats and so on against trans people that are happening in a wider sense. And you hear about the bathroom bills that are being passed. And then you don't really think about the fact that like Utah passed a bathroom bill, and Utah is an airline hub. Salt Lake City is an airline hub.
Mhm.
And so if I'm taking, if I'm flying somewhere and my flight has a layover in Utah, I have to be prepared to not use the bathroom in an airport that I could be in. I mean, airplanes are notoriously prone to delays, and I could be in an airport for 3, 5, 7, 12 hours. And the alternative to that is for me to use, a toilet that would not have me receiving state violence. So a male gendered bathroom. But then I run the risk of physical violence vis-a-vis immediately targeting and isolating myself while putting myself in a visibly and physically separated space with people who may be prone to violence against trans people.
Right.
So, you know,
And
you
those
lose
are
or
2
you lose.
you lose or you lose.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that makes an argument for, non-gendered bathrooms for all the reasons that those are,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
non-binary, I'd like to have a non-gendered bathroom sometimes, or just, like, I've been to places where it was gendered bathrooms, and it was just, like, each toilet was in a little room,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's
Just
completely fine. It's better for everyone.
it's really simple to have degendered toilets,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of culture and cultural stigma. There's somebody in my life who hates using degendered toilets because they have associated cis men using the restroom with urine on the floor. And never mind the fact that that is not a uniquely like cis male thing to encounter, that like anybody can make a mess anywhere in any sort of bathroom. But like she just does not want degendered bathrooms because what if there's pee on the floor? And it's like,
My
on
feet
the
go
what?
on the floor.
Yeah, my feet are wearing shoes.
My feet are wearing shoes. I'm not really planning to sit on the floor, touch the floor in a bathroom.
Yeah, but like, I fully agree.
I fully
Uh,
also, I don't love the idea that anyone's peeing on the floor either, just to
yeah,
put that out there.
perhaps the issue there is to address why are people peeing on the floor and not to address, but this
Yeah.
speaks to like wider issues around like cultural calcification and
Oh,
this
yeah.
I and this idea that like it's very hard to get people to like unlearn preconceived biases,
Mhm.
and to want to engage with social change as it affects them in their own material conditions. I can support things if the things that I'm supporting are affecting other people from a distance, but when it comes to me and starts to affect me, that's where things where you start to run. And you see this with every sort of like minority liberation movement, that the moment that you start affecting other people in material ways, that's when you start getting pushback. That's when you start getting like major resistance, because we have a deep incuriousness as a wider culture about why these things are structured that way.
Yeah. Curiosity has been coming through on the podcast so much, just being curious about the world around you.
Yeah.
But there's also another point I wanna make about people who don't think about the effects of the laws that they're having, or they think that they're supporting, or they don't think about. So, I don't have a relationship with my mom anymore.
Hmm.
And one of the parts of, like, fully ending that relationship with her was, like, spending a month arguing with her about the new trans laws they were making in Tennessee, and the anti-drag laws that were gonna then affect trans people. And my mom has known you for a decade as well,
Oh yeah.
and so I was often like, "Well, what about Ari?" Like, you're and the idea that, well, Aries one of the good ones, or like Aries one of like it'll never affect Ari, or because what the idea that this law you're supporting is only going to affect the bad ones is false,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and I fully agree with that. The ongoing spate around anti-trans legislation is something that obviously I follow very closely because it affects my ability to go to certain areas
Yeah.
geographically. It affects my friends. It affects people that I love who are in those areas. It affects just my wider, sorority of trans women and my fraternity of trans men. And I think that like there's so much to say about this, but like one of the big ones is that a lot of these are, I saw somebody who made a fantastic, very, very simple argument for this earlier today when I was on Blue Sky, who was like the argument around banning trans children from playing sports as their chosen gender.
Hmm.
The argument around that is not actually about trans sports. It's about having a law on the books that the Heritage Foundation and Focus on the Family can then point to and use to make legal arguments to exclude trans people from millions of other aspects of life.
Yeah.
And
It's about precedent.
exactly. And so, regardless of whether you think that trans people, trans children should be able to play sports, they should.
They
They
should.
should be able to play sports as their chosen gender. There's literally no argument why they shouldn't that holds any sort of weight. But even if you were to think that there is, that's not the purpose. There are like what, 36 trans high school athletes in the United States. This is not a fight about those 36 kids. This is a fight about how do we create a legal precedent through which we can springboard off of. And it's the basis through which the big bad stuff comes behind it.
Well,
Um,
and like, how do any of these laws, the way they're written, like the drag laws, how do we know that's not going to be applied to anyone else? Like, you know, if I go somewhere and I'm in pants and I look very masculine, whether or not I'm still being cisgender,
mhm.
people, those drag laws were still written in a way that could be like, well, you're performing the opposite gender and now you're going to jail.
Sure. And they're written in that way to create that
Control.
that that control and that threat of state violence. But I do also want to be clear that the purpose of those laws is to target
Trans.
uh, to target trans people, and that the even if it was possible for the state to use its violence against cis people who wear pants, or for cis people who are of Scottish descent who wear kilts, that's not what it's going to be used for. It is
Yeah.
going to be used for the targeting of trans people. And I think it's important that like we recognize the absurdity of it because
Yeah.
of how widely and in loosely defined it is, and how many things it catches under that net and pulls in. But I think it's also very important to remember that these are intended to and will be brought with the weight of the state against one to two very specific minorities.
Yeah. Absolutely. And with all everything we've talked about, how are you looking towards the future with your actions?
I am focused on, I don't, doesn't feel very genuine for me to say relentless optimism, but I'm focused on remaining positive and looking local. Obviously, with the results of the recent presidential election and the ongoing, continuing spree of anti-trans legislation that is being passed at the state level, and the promises of passage of anti-trans legislation at the federal level, many of the people that I know are very afraid. They're very afraid of what the future is going to hold. There's a lot of what we may call doomerism, that it's just a matter of time until access for our HRT is taken away, until,
Mhm.
we're being actively persecuted at a state level.
Mhm.
To which my response is, no, it's not just a matter of time. It hasn't happened yet. And rolling over and acting as if it already has is letting them win without needing to, without it's rolling over and opening up the door for them to just stroll in and take the win.
Yeah.
Um,
One of
and
the
so,
quotes I've read about like moving into this, we're looking towards tyranny, right?
mhm,
And one of the quotes I've seen, I don't know who it was that said it, but was like, "Don't obey in advance."
yes, yeah, don't
That's one
comply
of
in
the
advance.
don't comply in advance to fascists.
Yeah,
Act like, "No, we don't do that here."
mhm,
Yeah.
absolutely. And kind of to those ends, like I recognize that I have immense privilege of living in a state like Illinois and in a city like Chicago, both of which have extremely progressive legal policies around trans rights, trans identity. Illinois has some of the best trans legal protections at the state level in the entire country. Chicago has an absolute abundance of resources, whether it is organizations like Howard Brown Health here in Chicago that provide LGBT medical care to people without insurance on a sliding scale to make things affordable and accessible. Orgs like the Center on Halsted, or there's so many different groups here in Chicago. So I have immense privilege to be living in a place that has that safety. But kind of looking towards the future, another thing that like I've been doing is, now that I've had, you know, brief pops of, you know, my presence on social media expanding beyond my immediate bubble. I find that there are people who are regularly reaching out to me being like, "Hey, like I'm thinking about moving to Chicago. I'm looking at moving to Chicago. I'm coming to Chicago to think about, coming here." People from states like Texas, people from states like North Carolina, states like Tennessee, and I'm very happy to be able to be kind of like an initial guide and to be like, hey, like here are like material benefit resources. Like this is where you should look. Here are the neighborhoods where, there are a higher than normal concentration of trans women so that you're going to feel like you are in a particular neighborhood and community where you don't stick out as much.
Mhm.
Here is, places to look to like meet other people and like build community. And it's been really, really nice to be able to like look in my inbox sometimes, which is a phrase that I don't think anyone has ever uttered. I can't wait to look into my social media inboxes and get messages from strangers. But when I see those messages, it brings me a lot of joy to be able to be like, hey, like let me share this city with you. Let me share this space with you. Let me show you where the resources are and where the people are so that you can get out of places like Texas. You can get out of places like Tennessee. You can get out of rural North Carolina. You can get out of Utah and come to a place like Chicago where you are going to be more protected. And so looking towards the future, trying to get people to places where they are safe.
Yeah. You're great.
Thanks.
And we haven't mentioned Missouri one time, even though that's where we met.
Yeah. Um, I Gosh, I have complicated feelings about Missouri. Love the university. It breaks my heart to think about the fact that, like, unquestionably and without a shadow of a doubt, when I first enrolled at the University of Missouri, it was before I had detransitioned, and so I was enrolling as a trans woman in 2007, and it absolutely breaks my heart to know that the university will have gotten monstrously worse in terms of the protections and resources that were afforded to me in 2007 as opposed to now, because 2007 was not a great time to be trans. It was just for a lot of other reasons, but the University of Missouri was a wonderful institution to me that did a lot to help me feel welcome there. And I don't feel welcome going back. And that breaks my heart because I have so much fondness and so much love for the city of Columbia, for the university, for the athletics teams, the football team and the basketball team and the softball team, old places that you and I used to go and hang out at, that
Yeah.
we would socialize at or grab bites to eat at. And that feels like a world that's lost to me.
Yeah.
But, hopefully, working towards a future where that will be different and that will change and then it'll be possible to go back.
Yeah. Absolutely. I want that. I know you want that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to take my daughter to a Mizzou football game. I want to go tailgating with her someday. That's
Yeah.
a life goal for me. That's a dream.
To where homecoming started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The OG homecoming.
Yeah, it's so weird for me because my family's still there. And so, like, I have to go back and I'm careful about, like, where I go, where I hang out, and what I wear. What
Yeah.
clothes am I taking when I go back? Because I look like a very gender nonconforming LGBT person at this point in my life. And, not only has my dad asked me to not rub it in his face,
Oh, joy.
but it's dangerous and a risk to look gay
Yeah.
in the middle of Missouri. And so anyway, that's just something that we consider and protect ourselves from
Yeah.
and hope for better in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Working towards a world where that won't be the case, but knowing that we need to guard ourselves in the
Yeah.
interim.
Yeah. What are you here to promote?
Gosh, I don't know.
You can be here to promote a concept.
Sure. I, we didn't even get the chance to talk about any of the art that I do. I recently published a zine called This Dish Cannot Be Found. I'm holding it up right now in front of the camera. It's a cute little zine.
I just got
It,
mine in the mail and it's on my altar.
Yay! A lot of people have been putting it on their altars. That's such a touching home for it to find for so many people. I'm so glad that it speaks to them in such a way. It's all about food that you cannot eat in a variety of different lenses. Nominally about my obsession with how on Facebook and Instagram you will see recipes that are AI generated, but the recipe preview images for them are also AI generated. And so I see pictures of desserts that cannot physically exist.
Yeah.
That it is impossible to create a dessert that looks like what is in this image. And that kind of spawned this whole rabbit hole of going into talking about food that we could make but don't, food that exists solely on the internet in our collective subconsciousness, edibility in a trans and queer sense. There's a lot that goes into it. People seem to really resonate with it. So find me on social media and I will send you a copy of it.
What
Uh,
socials are you on and what's your handle?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and I'm on Blue Sky. You can find me on Twitter at not12x, and you can find me on Blue Sky at Deer Ears. That's DEEREA.RS. At some point soon, I will have my actual website set up, which will be Deer Ears, and you will be able to email me at airy@Deer Ears. So, but I haven't actually set that up yet. I should probably do that before this episode goes live.
Yeah.
Let's just say that it'll be up in time by the time that this episode goes live.
Great. And I also want to mention we're recording this mid-January and you just left Meta-based social medias.
I did.
Could you just tell us why?
Yeah. So I want to say it was last week, Meta announced a change to their terms of service that talking about harassing and targeting language. And they specifically rolled back protections for trans people and wrote in that it was acceptable within the terms of service Meta platforms to harass and target people around issues of quote unquote, oh gosh, what was the terrible, terrible right wing phrasing that they used? Gender ideology. And they provided the examples that it is okay to call trans people mentally ill. And so I made the decision that this is no longer a platform and a space that I feel safe in, and deactivated my socials that operate on a Meta platform. I probably should get rid of my Twitter, but I have too much of a poster's brain. I think up really goofy things and need to say them, and have other people give me the brief little dopamine of the like button.
Well, and I
But
probably won't leave the Meta platforms because I've been on there since I was 15 and I've spent decades being more than a decade being a really, really, really active poster.
yeah,
And so I'm over here like, you want me to lose like 15? I'm 33 now. How many years is that?
that would be 18.
18 years of my own content. Like, I'm not ready to give that up yet, but I am I'm seeing that they've just put heritage people who started the project 2025 and were
Mhm.
architects of it on their content supervisory board. And so that is something that I'm watching and being aware of. That's going to be a huge divestment for me if I decide to do it.
Yeah, it's hard. Like I've been on Facebook since 2006, I want to say. And that's 19 years of photos, 19 years of memories, 19 years of connections, people that I don't have any other way of staying in touch with as of now, that I've closed myself off to. And that sucks. But,
Yeah.
I don't begrudge anyone the decisions, that they make in an immediate sense. We cannot fight every fight everywhere all of the time, but it is important to keep an eye on how the environments on each space change, and to just continue to ask yourself, like, I ask myself this around Twitter all the time. Like, the person who owns Twitter, Elon Musk, is a horrific, horrific transphobe, and Twitter's policies are transphobic. I think fundamentally the difference for me on it is I don't talk about my daughter, and I don't, post pictures of my daughter on Twitter. Whereas like Facebook was siloed. I could silo it to people who I knew in real life. And so, you know, family pictures were there. But But yeah, it's important to continue to interrogate your own comfortability. Am
Yeah.
I comfortable continuing to, support this organization? And those answers change over time. I'll probably be back on Meta at some point, but I hope that it is after they have rethought these policies.
Yeah. Yeah. And the more we tell them that we hate these policies, the more likely that is possible.
Yeah. And that's important, to be loud and to be vocal.
Yeah. Okay.
Speak with your words, but also with your feet.
Explain that.
There are so like me deactivating my Meta accounts is speaking with my feet. I've left the platform, and I'm no longer on there, which means that they're no longer able to, directly gather my data, and and continue to collect data about me, which is the backbone of their business model. But
Yeah.
also in a much smaller sense, they're no longer able to serve up advertisements to me and make money off of putting advertisements in front of me. So that's one way of choosing to speak on this issue. And when I was deactivating my Meta account, or accounts plural, because I'm also off of Instagram.
Yeah.
I was never on Threads. Thank thank God. But as I was deactivating all of these accounts, they're like, what is the reason for you deactivating the accounts? And one of the options is I no longer feel safe on this platform. So checked that box. And then there was like is there anything else that you would like to say? I was like, yes, you have instituted transphobic policies that make this space unsafe for trans people. And I know that that's not getting read by an individual person, but it's getting put into a giant blender of data analysis. And so it'll
Mhm.
tick up a little box that a data analysis somewhere will see that'll go into a report that'll go across somebody's desk. So that's speaking with my feet. But we also speak with our words when, like for me, being on Twitter, I speak to the bullshit of that particular platform.
Yeah. Cool. I
Yeah.
love you so much, and I'm really glad that you came to talk to me on my podcast.
Yeah, I love you too. Oh my gosh, this is a really nice treat. I got to bust out my old podcasting microphone. It was really fun.
Yeah. I will catch up with you later.
Sounds great.
Thanks for tuning in to Asteria's Convos. You can find the links for this episode in the episode description. You can find me, Asteria Elzea, on TikTok, Instagram, and Threads as at asteria.elzea and on Blue Sky as at Asteria Elzea. Spell it Asteria dot Elzea. Please leave a review on your favorite podcast hosting service. That's the absolute best way for our community to grow. Remember, your actions create the future. All my love, Asteria Elzea.